He was standing at my door, drenched by the rain, with the same pathetic look I had on my face the day he laughed at me. That day, I was crying because my father, on his deathbed, had asked me not to give up on my dreams, and he called me dramatic. So, the day after the funeral, I took the small inheritance my father left me and founded the company he always said was a stupid idea. Today, my company is worth 8 figures. And him? He was just evicted from the apartment his family paid for. The story that those 30 seconds summarize was written over 6 years of silence, strategy, and relentless work. 6 years that truly began not just in a hospital, but in the life we led before it. I remember one specific spring evening, about a year before my father got sick. I had been offered a promotion at my job, a significant step up, one I had worked towards for years. But it required a 6-month stint in another city. When I told Mark, his face fell, not with pride for me, but with concern for himself. "But what about my launch?" he'd asked, referring to his latest venture. "This is a critical time. I need you here." And so, like I always did, I chose us over me. I turned down the promotion. I told myself it was a sacrifice for our future. He called me his rock. I didn't realize then that a rock is something you stand on to get a better view for yourself, only to be left behind on the ground. If you're already hooked by stories like this, hit the like button and subscribe right now so you don't miss how justice is served. Then came the autumn of the hospital. That sterile, beige world became my entire existence. The scent of antiseptic clung to my clothes, and the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was the soundtrack to my days. My father, a man who had built houses with his own 2 hands, was now confined to a bed, his strength fading with each sunset. In the quiet hours, I'd read to him from old novels, his callous hand resting in mine. His skin felt like worn parchment, a map of a life well lived. On one of his last lucid afternoons, when the sunlight streamed through the window, thick with dust, he pulled my hand closer. His grip was surprisingly firm, a final spark of the man he was. He looked right at me, his eyes clear and direct. "Daughter," his voice was a dry whisper, a monumental effort. "I see the fire in you, the same one your grandmother had. It's your most precious gift. Don't let this world or any man convince you to smother that flame just to keep them warm. Promise me you'll build something that is entirely yours, something no one can ever take from you." Hot tears streamed down my face, not just of sorrow, but of a profound, heartbreaking love. I promised him, my voice choked with emotion. He smiled then, a smile of pure peace, as if my promise had unburdened his soul. He wasn't just talking about a business. He was giving me back to myself. I drove home that night in a daze, the world outside my windshield a blur of lights and rain. I felt like a fragile vessel, carrying my father's last wish and my own shattering grief. I walked in to find Mark on the couch, controller in hand, the television blaring with the sounds of a digital war. The sheer volume of it felt like a violation of the sacred silence I carried within me. I sank onto the armchair opposite him, the exhaustion so deep it was in my bones. I told him everything, about my father's final wish, about the promise, about the unbearable weight of knowing our time was almost over. My voice broke, and the sobs I had been holding back finally escaped. It was a raw primal cry of loss and love. He paused the game. The sudden silence was jarring. For a foolish, hopeful second, I leaned into it, expecting an embrace, a word of comfort. Instead, I heard it, a low chuckle from deep in his chest. It grew, bubbling up until it exploded from his mouth in a full-throated laugh. He threw his head back and laughed until his face was red, laughed until he had to wipe a tear of mirth from the corner of his eye. "Oh my God," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. "Your dad and his grand pronouncements. Don't let them put out your flame. It's like a line from a bad movie. You two are just so dramatic, so emotional." Right here, at the turning point of the story. If you're feeling the rage and determination building, make sure you're subscribed. What comes next is the building of an empire. Every word was a hammer blow. The sound of his laughter didn't just fill the room. It desecrated it. It took my most sacred moment of vulnerability and twisted it into a joke. His amusement wasn't just cruel. It was a fundamental statement on my worth in his eyes. My pain was his entertainment. In that instant, my love for him didn't wither or fade. It froze solid, then shattered into a million ice-cold shards. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I simply stood up, walked upstairs, and for the first time in our relationship, I locked our bedroom door. He had no idea, but with that laugh, he had just officiated his own funeral in my life. 2 days later, at the real funeral, while I stood numbly accepting condolences, he was pacing by the oak tree, talking loudly on his phone about scaling the business and securing the next round of funding. He didn't shed a tear. He saw a gathering of people as a networking opportunity. In the car on the way home, he had the audacity to suggest that my inheritance would be the perfect injection of capital to finally get his startup off the ground. That was it. The final piece of evidence I didn't even need. The clarity I felt was absolute and terrifyingly calm. The following week, while he was away at a tech conference, I methodically packed my life into boxes. I transferred every single cent of my father's legacy into a newly incorporated business account. The company's name? A tribute to the street where my father grew up. I wasn't just starting a business. I was honoring a promise. The first 2 years were a crucible. I lived in a tiny studio apartment that smelled of instant coffee and desperation. I sold my car and learned the city's bus routes. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. There were nights I'd stare at a line of code until 4 in the morning, my eyes burning, fueled by nothing but sheer will. I remember one client, a big one, who pulled out at the last minute, almost bankrupting me. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by bills I couldn't pay, and for a fleeting moment, I thought he was right. But then, I remembered my father's hand in mine, the weight of his belief. I remembered the sound of Mark's laughter, and I got back to work. His voice messages still came periodically. The angry ones, the condescending ones, the ones feigning concern. I never listened to them. I just deleted them. His words were ghosts, and I was building a house they couldn't haunt. The breakthrough happened in the 3rd year. My software, that stupid idea, found its footing. It solved a complex problem with an elegant solution. I landed a contract with a mid-sized tech firm. I reinvested every penny. I hired my first employee, then a second. We moved from my apartment to a tiny, windowless office, and it felt like a palace. As my world was being built, brick by brick, his was crumbling. I'd hear snippets from mutual acquaintances. His ventures were spectacular fireworks, a bright, flashy launch followed by a quick, silent fizzle. He was a genius of the pitch, the presentation, the promise. But he lacked the grit for the follow-through. He was a man made of charisma and borrowed money, and both eventually run out. Today, that lonely one-woman operation has offices in 3 states and a team of 50 brilliant people. The 8-figure valuation is a fact, not a dream. I bought this house a year ago. A place with high ceilings and a garden where I planted my father's favorite roses. It is a sanctuary built on resilience. The news of his final collapse was no surprise. His family, his lifelong safety net, had finally tired of the endless cycle of hype and failure. The eviction was just the last, inevitable domino to fall. And now, the storm of his own making has washed him up on my shore. He stands at my door, the man who considered my grief to be drama, now the star of his own tragedy. His eyes plead for a scene he hasn't written, a rescue he hasn't earned. I open the door, just a crack, letting the cold night air flow between us. "Mark," I say, my voice steady, calm. "I remember everything about that day. I remember the sound of your laughter, and I remember the promise I made to my father." I step back, my hand resting on the solid wood of the door. "You will not find shelter in this house. My home was built with a material you never understood. Respect." I close the door. There is no slam, just a soft, final click. The sound of an ending, the sound of peace, the sound of a promise, well and truly kept. If you've ever had to turn your deepest pain into your greatest fuel, you know that the real victory isn't watching someone else fall. It's having the strength not to offer your hand to help them up, If you believe in justice and the power of rebuilding yourself, like this video and subscribe for more stories of power and vindication.